Hello and welcome to this ArtCAM demonstration where I'll be showing you how we can create this wooden bowl using ArtCAM Insignia 2015, and then we can turn it into clip art and create an appliqué in order to create this decorative panel. I'll be doing this all from one simple image that I've grabbed off the internet. This demonstration is going to incorporate the 2-rail sweep functionality, the Extrude tool, the shape editor, and also Toolpath Templates, along with many other things. So I'm going to go straight over to ArtCAM now, and I'm going to simply drag and drop an image into ArtCAM. I'm going to resize it so it's half the height and width that it was previously, just so it's more manageable, and I've got the origin in the bottom left hand corner, and I'm going to be working in millimeters there. So I'll say OK to that. You can see that we've got a colour palette down at the bottom with all of these colours making up this one image. Now I'm going to turn the transparency down to start with so it's nice and low, because I'm going to be using this image just as a background so I can start drawing my own vectors from it. I'm going to start by creating the centre of this flower by using a simple circle vector from my vector creation toolbar on the left hand side. I'm simply going to start in the middle where the cursor changes and drag out a circle. Just zoom in there so you can see that clearly. Now I'm going to input a specific value, radius of 36 millimeters, and say create. Close that down. If I zoom in now, I can actually just tweak the position so it's precisely over the middle of my flower. Now I want to start creating the vectors for one of my petals. So I'm going to zoom in slightly. I'm going to go to my polyline tool. I'm going to draw smooth polylines. I'm going to start inside the centre of this circle. So we're going to be creating the petal that goes into that circle, and I'm simply going to click around my petal like so we can trace around that shape. Again, extending into that circle, spacebar to finish. If you're not happy with exactly how your vector was created, you can enter node editing and then zoom in and then tweak some of your nodes like so. I'm pretty happy with that. But what I'm going to be using this for is the 2-rail sweep tool, and that means we can't have this dip in the middle here because that's going to be one end of our drive rails. So I'm just going to hover over this node here, press D on the keyboard to delete it. I can also manipulate this one around a little bit as well. So now what I'm going to do is cut these vectors in the middle. So we'll find the middle roughly, hover over and press C on the keyboard, and that means we now have 2 vectors created. So I'm going to go exit the node editing mode. I want to create copies of these 2 vectors. So I can shift select them both. I'm going to enter the transform tool, and I want to rotate to copy them around my model, like so. Now at the moment, if I just twizzle that around, you can see the pivot point is in the centre of those 2 vectors. So I'm going to undo that, go back to my transform tool, and I'm going to move that pivot point and snap it to my circle centre. You see how it snaps there? My cursor changes and it's in the centre. So now I can create copies. I can hold down my control key to drag out a copy like so. And again, I'm going to create multiple copies so we have petals going all the way around my model. Like so. So now I've done this, I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to be using 2-rail sweep, so we need to have cross sections in there. So I'm going to create these next. I'm going to start by creating just a simple rectangle. I'm going to zoom into a blank area of my model. I'm going to create a nice long thin rectangle like so. Say create, and then we'll close that down. I'm going to to enter node editing. So we can do that by pressing N on the keyboard, hover over these two nodes, and we'll smooth those out like so. Now I'm going to move them inwards slightly, so we've got a nice straight span up there. We'll also tuck these in a little bit as well. Now I'm going to enter a midpoint, so I can do this by hovering over and pressing M on the keyboard. I'm going to select this guy and move it down manually. Since I've got something that looks a bit like this and I'm happy, I can then cut this vector, so I can press C and C, can delete this span. I'm going to go back to normal mode and create a copy of this vector in order to create my second cross section. So I'm going to drag out a copy like so, go back to node editing, so N on the keyboard. I'm going to add a couple more midpoints in, pressing M, and I'm going to grab all three of these middle points and drag them down. Okay, so what I'm doing here, if I just bring the transparency back, is creating or trying to create these two shapes in here. So we've got a nice bulbous end, but we've got a dip shape in the middle. And obviously I'm just using it as a guide. So I'm going to manipulate my nodes so I get the shape that I want. We've got some nice round tops there. And once you've got something that looks a bit like that, that's going to be okay. The reason I started by creating a rectangle is so these are going to be on a horizontal plane. So I could have used a guide as well. So you see that, like so. So before I start creating my relief by using the 2L sweep functionality, I'm going to increase my resolution. So I can do this by holding down this icon here, and we can see we've got a current resolution of 800 by 600 points. I'm going to drag that up to as high as my machine can handle, so that's all the way up to the top, and that's going to give you a better quality relief. We get this warning, are you sure you wish to continue? Yes. I'm in the 3D view, show my vectors. I'm going to view from the top, and I'm going to open up the 2L sweep tool, which is this top one here. So it's asking me to set a first drive rail, second drive rail, and then some cross sections. So I'm going to work on my first petal first of all. I can select this vector and set it as my first drive rail, this vector as my second drive rail, and then we can have our cross sections. So I'm going to start with this guy. And when I click away, you can see that my flow of my vector is going all the way around. So I'm going to reverse my second drive rail, like so, in order to create the start profile here and then the end profile here. So here's my start profile, and I'm going to say add, select my end profile and say add, and then it will get added at the end. We can inspect this relief if we want to. I'll turn the vector visibility off, and we've got this, a nice looking shape here. But it's not exactly what we want. We want to have more of a bowl-like shape in here and then a bulbous end. So we'll view from the top and show our vector visibility again. I'm going to select my first cross section again and insert cross section, and now I have to input 2 points on my first drive rail, then my second drive rail. It's just a position, and you can see how that updates and changes our relief. So now I'm going to select my second cross section. We'll insert, and then we're just going to do 2 clicks right at the end, and again you can see how that affects our relief. So I'll toggle vector visibility off, and we can expect that. If I bring it back on, you can see that we might want to reduce the height of these lips here, and we can actually do that interactively. So if I select my first cross section, I can select these high nodes here and simply move them down, and you can see we've got an update there, and that looks much better there. Now I'm going to say add and apply, and we'll close that down. View from the top, turn our vector visibility off, inspect your petal. Once you're happy with everything that you've got, you can start creating the rest of your petals. So I'm going to do that now. I've just lost my project panel here, which is probably quite useful. So if you do close that down by accident, you can bring it back by right-clicking in this dark grey area here, and then bringing back the project panel like so. And we're going to need this later on. We've got our vector layers, bitmap layers in there, and our reliefs and clip arts and whatnot. So I'm going to create my next 2-rail sweep, and I'm going to do this slightly differently but quicker. I'm going to click on my first drive rail, hold down my shift key, second drive rail. Then I need to shift select my 2 cross sections in the correct order, and you can see our relief is created. Now because we haven't reversed our second drive rail yet, our relief looks quite strange, so we can just reverse that and then we get the design that we're after. So I view from the top, and now I want to insert my 2 cross sections. And one at the end there. And once you're happy, you can zoom in, inspect your relief. You can see that we've got this funny looking lip here, if I just hide my vectors. And that's because we've got add as the combine mode. So what we want to change it to is merge high. And you can see that blends those 2 reliefs in nicely together, and then we can say apply, and we'll close that down. So now I want to create the other 3 very quickly. I can simply, first of all, select all of the second vectors and then right click and reverse vectors, and that means I'm not going to have to reverse them inside the 2-rail sweep tool. Now I'm just going to select them all in order, open up the 2-rail sweep tool, and then input my cross sections. So when you've done that, you can inspect your petals. But next what we want to do is create a shape for the middle of our flower. So I'm going to open up the shape editor. I want to create a round shape with a start height of 9 millimeters. And if I zoom in again and inspect, you can see that we've got add as our combine mode, and that's the undesired effect. So if I change that to merge high, you can see that all blends in nicely, and we can say apply and close that down. Now the next thing I want to do is add a texture on top of my flower. If I go back to my 2D view, you can see that we've got a nice texture there where the seeds would be in the flower. Go back to my 3D, turn my vector layers on. You can see that I've got the circle vector selected, and then I can simply go to texture relief. I want to create a texture inside the selected vector. I want a pyramid shape and a sizing of 5 millimeters, and then we'll just say add. And you can see that's added inside that selected vector, and close. The next thing that I want to do is create the leaves. So we go back to our 2D image, turn up the transparency, where you can see we've got these leaves up here, just to complete the flower. So back on the 3D view, I'm going to create a new vector layer for these leaf vectors, and I'm going to rename it leaf and apply. So I can turn the visibility of default layer off, and then I'm going to create a polyline. So I want to create a straight polyline. I'll zoom into this top area here, and I want to draw a straight line down the middle going straight into that circle vector. Spacebar to finish your line, and then I can just create another one. So if I turn on the visibility of my image in this 3D view, I can use it as a guide to creating these points here. So I'm making a sort of kite shape. Spacebar to finish. Again, you can turn the transparency all the way down, or just toggle back onto the modelling colour. Now I'm going to mirror this vector over this line, so I can shift select the line, mirror vector in selected line, like so. Once I've done that, I'm going to have to create another 4 copies of it. So I'm going to do this the same way I did the petal originally. Go into my transform tool. I can snap the pivot point to the centre of my circle. Might be easier if I'm a bit more zoomed in there. You can see my cursor changes when I get to the middle of my circle. And then I'm going to hold down my control key and simply create a copy there. And again. And now I've got 5 of those leaf shapes. So I'm going to do this by creating a 2-rail sweep again. So I need to have 2 cross sections. I'm going to create a polygon. So I'm going to create a triangle actually, which is a polygon with 3 sides, and say create. And then I'm going to simply go into my node editing by pressing N on the keyboard and then cutting out this bottom section by hovering over the node and pressing C. And then I can simply move that straight span down, like so. So these are my 2 cross sections. I'm going to go into my 2-rail sweep tool. I can set my first drive rail, my second drive rail. You can see that the vectors are flowing in the correct direction. This is the start where I want my point to be, so I can select my triangle point and say add. Then I can select my flat plane and add. Now I'm going to have to go in and add another cross section, as this is protruding too high up above my flower. So I'm going to insert cross section and simply add a cross section in there, and then I can turn my vectors off and inspect that. That's much better. So I'm going to say merge high and apply. Then I'm going to do this all around my model. So now once I've done that, I'll turn the vector visibility off and you can have a look at your model. I'm happy with that. There's just one thing I want to do now, and that's to smooth out my pyramid pattern that I created on that circle. So bring my vectors back on. I'll turn the vector layer for leaf off, and we'll turn the default layer back on, and I can select this circle and go to offset vectors because I want to smooth all the way past this circle. Now I can simply view from the top and use interactive offsetting, so you can pull inwards or outwards, and I can just pull a few mil back there, and then I can smooth inside that selected vector. So I'll do smooth relief from our relief editing toolbar, and we can do a couple of smoothing passes there. So I've just done 2. Once you've done that, I'm going to open up my clip art library and save my flower as clip art. So here I'm going to show you how we can create a new folder in here, and you can fill it with all of your own custom reliefs. So we can say new. If we go down to reliefs, you get all of the model libraries here. I can make new folder and call it, I'll just call it demo for now. And then I'll say OK. You can see that we've got an empty library or an empty folder, and I can simply drag my relief across and drop it into that folder, and there we have our relief, and you can rename it if you wish. So now once I've done this, I can actually close my model down, and I don't need to save it because I've saved my relief, and that will be stored as a .rlf file. Now what I have created earlier is this panel.art. So it's an ArtCAM file where I've already created the vectors because I've already covered vector creation in this tutorial. So now I want to demonstrate the Extrude tool. So what we have here are a couple of drive rails, or what we're going to use as drive rails. They are just vectors. And then here is what's going to be my cross section. So I'm going to open up my Extrude tool. If I just hold down, it's the second one down, and the other options we have are spin and turn. So if we open up Extrude, I can select my two rectangle vectors and set them as my drive rail, and then I can select my cross section and set it as the start profile. Now if I go over to my 3D view, you can see what shape we have created here. So that's not exactly what I wanted for my panels. I actually want to subtract that shape rather than create a positive cross section. So I'm going to invert in Z, and you can see now that's cross section is subtracted away from my zero plane, and I also want to use other side. And you can see it jumps to the other side and gives us these nice square edges. So I can say apply and close that down. So the next thing I want to do is create a dome shape from this ellipse, so create a concave shape, which is where I want to then place my patterns later on. So I'm going to double click this ellipse shape, and you can see that we'll get a dome already forming. I'm going to view from the front. I'm going to have add as my combine mode, and I'm going to simply pull it down until I get the sort of depth that I want. I actually want a depth of -40, so I can type that in. And I can investigate it now, so it's coming all the way down, but my material is going to be deeper than that, so that doesn't matter. And I can say apply and close that down. So that's our recess ready for our pattern. So what this demonstration is going to show is how to create Toolpath templates, which is going to be really useful if you're creating many panels with different decorative designs on. So I'm going to create a new vector layer now, and I'm going to call it machining vectors. Like so, and I'm going to turn the default layer off. So I want to create some vectors which encompass all of my relief, so I can do this by creating a boundary from relief. We can use a height range with a max or min height, but I'm just going to create a boundary, a smooth boundary, around all of my relief. So if I now go over to my 2D view, you can see that we've encompassed all of our extrude and all of our concave shape. I'm going to use these vectors, I'm going to keep them selected, to create my toolpaths to machine this design. So I can click on toolpaths from my project panel. I'm going to create a 3D machine relief toolpath. We're going to have a 5mm end mill as our roughing toolpath, and a 0.5mm ball nose as our finishing toolpath. And I'm also going to put an angle of 45 degrees in there. So that's not changing the angle that the tool is machining, but it's actually rotating the entire toolpath. Now I want to set up my material. I'm going to set it to have a material depth of 25mm, and we want to have our model at the top of the block. So we'll say OK. So you can see we've got a representation there of our material, and I can say calculate now. So you can see what's happening here is I'm creating a toolpath over my entire piece of material. So I've missed out a step. I'm going to go back up to the top and choose to machine inside selected vectors. I'm going to choose inside or outside vector. Obviously I'm going to choose inside, and then I'm going to recalculate. So it's okay if you do make a mistake. Now you can see that I've done the correct machining. I'm machining inside my vectors, and I can close that down and simulate my toolpath. There's our roughing, and there's our 0.5mm finishing ball nose. And you can see it's going in at 45 degrees. Okay, so here's our panel. I've got medium oak set up as my material colour in my simulation. So now I've got a blank canvas or a blank template, and I can save these toolpaths, and then I can create a design on my panel. So I'm going to go to Toolpaths, and we've got this icon here, and we can save Toolpaths as a template. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to just call it panel, and that's going to save as a .tpl file, and we'll say save. So now I've done this, I can actually just delete my toolpaths. I'll delete my simulation, and if I just turn the backplane off, you'll see the relief that we've actually created. So I want to create a custom pattern in here. I'm going to open up my clip art library. You can see I can navigate to my folder called demo, and I can simply select that flower that I created earlier, and it comes in as clip art. We can move that around and paste it wherever we want. So here's our transform settings. We can set a width and a height. I'm going to set the width to be 60, and I've got aspect ratio maintained, so our height will adjust. I'll say apply. If I just rotate that round, we've got quite a silly Z height there, so I can set that to be 8 millimeters and say apply. I'll just view from the top, and I want to center the clip art inside my ellipse vector, like so. Now I just want to make a slight adjustment to my flower. As you can see, it's not sat quite square, so I'm going to go back into my transform tool and then just rotate anti-clockwise 5 degrees and say apply. And now I've done this, I'm ready to paste him down. So I can go over to my combine mode settings. I want to make sure I'm adding to my dome and say paste. When I do this, you can see that the flower is wrapped onto my concave dome shape. Now I want to complete the design with 2 more flowers. I'm just going to view from the top, select my flower clip art again. You can see we get the clip art shown in blue. Again, I'm going to have to square up my flower, but this time I want to turn him upside down, so I can rotate 185 degrees anti-clockwise and apply, like so. I'm going to change the width to be 30 millimeters, and I'll set the Z range to be 5 millimeters. When I've done this, I can position this flower over somewhere in the ellipse like so. And then to make sure it's in the correct position vertically, I can shift select my ellipse and then center vertically, like so, and he just drops down into place. Now I'm just going to use the arrow keys to nudge into a better location, and then I can mirror that clip art across the model, like so. So I've got 2 of those. Then I can simply select both of them, go to my transform tool and paste. You can see that they're wrapped onto that concave dome. Again, if I view from the front, you see that my flower design isn't protruding above my panel. So now I want to create the toolpaths for this design. Now I already created the toolpaths that I wanted, so I can open up the toolpath template that I saved earlier. You can see that it shows in red in my toolpaths panel. That means it's not being calculated yet. So I can right click and calculate. You can see my toolpaths are calculated there, and then I can do a simulation. So there was my roughing, and here's my 45-degree finishing toolpath. And we've not had to individually create our toolpath. All we've done is load our toolpath template that we saved earlier. And you can see we've now created a simulation of what our toolpath is going to do. So what we need to do now is save and export our toolpaths as NC code. So to do this, we click on toolpaths. We can say save toolpaths. I'm going to assume I've got a manual tool changer, so I'm going to select the correct post processor. Then I can choose to save toolpaths to separate files and append toolpath details to file names in order so I know which toolpath to run on the machine in which order. I can choose a location. I'm going to create a new folder in here. called Toolpaths, and we'll just call them panel and say open. When I hit save, our toolpaths are created. So if I navigate to that folder, you can see we've got this new folder now called Toolpaths. I can open that up and we've got 2 tap files. If I open one of these, here's our NC code. And if we look at the name of that toolpath, you can see that it's Toolpath 1, Machine Relief, End Mill, 5mm roughing. So I know exactly what tool to use and what that toolpath is going to do. Thanks very much for watching. This demonstration was to show you how we could create this wooden flower and then turn it into an applique using clip art. And in there we used the 2-rail sweep, we used Extrude functionality, and we also used Toolpath Templates. Thanks very much for watching.